So, what is blood? Is it just like a red liquid? No, it is. You're right. It is more. There is oxygen. Blood is actually made of two things. Two big groups of things. Most of the blood is liquid that we call plasma. And then floating in that liquid, suspended in that liquid, are different types of cells and cell parts. So we're going to talk about each of the parts of the blood. Most of your blood is just liquid. If you were to separate it from the other parts of the blood, it's sort of this yellowish liquid. And it's responsible for containing the dissolved nutrients that our blood carries. Things like glucose, amino acids, vitamins, minerals. Those things that we call nutrients, they're dissolved in the plasma of the blood. So they get transported to all the cells in the plasma. Oh, sorry. You need that up there still? That's quick. One more. Yep. Reproductive. All right, so then floating in this liquid are a few different things. First is the red blood cells. We often abbreviate red blood cells as RBCs. In red blood cells, they're these flattened discs, kind of look like plates. And they don't have a nucleus in them. But they do have a special type of protein that helps them do their job. And what is their main job of these red blood cells? Sydney? You were? Oh, you were. Samantha?
To provide oxygen.
Yeah, they're responsible for bringing oxygen to our cells. So when we say our blood carries oxygen, really it's the red blood cells that carry the oxygen. And they're able to do this because of a special type of protein called hemoglobin. Part of the red blood cell. And hemoglobin is a molecule that it can actually bond with an oxygen molecule to transport it. Does anyone remember from when we talked about nutrition which mineral is important to making hemoglobin? If you don't have enough of this in your diet, you can get anemia, you can be weak and not have a lot of energy. No, not. Same letter as iodine. Iron. Hemoglobin contains iron. If you don't have enough iron in your diet, your blood cells may not have enough hemoglobin. They may not be able to carry enough oxygen, and then you can be very tired and fatigued and not have much energy, and that's what anemia is.
What is fatigue?
Tired very easily. The red blood cell's job is to carry oxygen. We have another type of blood cell called the white blood cells. Does anybody remember what white blood cells do? Kevin?
Oh, they fight bacteria.
Yeah, they are our body's immune system. And they help protect us from pathogens, viruses, bacteria. And we don't have that many. Compared to red blood cells, there's a lot fewer white blood cells in our blood. But when we are sick, when we are infected by a pathogen or bacteria, we have a cold, the numbers increase drastically. When you get sick, the number of white blood cells, they divide, they reproduce, so that there's more and more of them to help fight off the infection. If you ever had a cut or something and it got infected, it gets all pussy, that's basically white blood cells. They're there to destroy the bacteria that are causing your infection. Alexis?
I thought white blood cells were bad for
We're bad for what?
your body.
No, they're good. They help protect you. Certain diseases like leukemia can affect the white blood cells, and you can get cancer. And sometimes they're used as an indicator to tell if you have some sort of infection in your body you might not know about. But white blood cells have a job to do to help protect cancer. Sydney?
Does bone marrow use white blood cells too?
Yes. And actually, white blood cells are very complicated. The way our immune system works, there's all sorts of different types of white blood cells and antibodies, and so it's pretty complex. We're barely going to cover it. We're just going to basically say white blood cells help our body to destroy pathogens. And then you have one more part to our blood. Red blood cells, white blood cells, and then platelets. Platelets are not actually cells. Okay? They are cell parts that, do you remember what they do? We talked about it again in nutrition. They are responsible for our blood clotting. When we have damage to a blood vessel, the platelets start to clump together. They form this sort of network, this fiber, that starts to seal off that damage to the blood vessel. And then blood cells start to collect there, and more platelets. And they form this sort of net that eventually stops you from bleeding. So platelets are why you stop bleeding. If you get a paper cut on your skin and bleeds a little bit, eventually there's a small injury. These platelets sort of seal up those blood vessels. Platelets are part of what forms a scab if you have an injury or something. Okay? That's a mixture of platelets and trapped red blood cells and some white blood cells and things like that. Platelets are responsible for our blood clotting. Any questions about the blood? You could take a sample of blood and run it through a process called a centrifuge. A centrifuge is basically, it takes blood or anything and put it in this a little machine, and it spins it around really, really quickly. And what happens is the parts of the blood separate according to their density. You can actually see it. If they took a tube of blood and centrifuge it, it separates. On the top is the plasma, the liquid portion. You can see it. It's more than half of the blood. On the bottom are the red blood cells. They're about 45%. That's the next greatest proportion. And then platelets and white blood cells are much smaller for it. They're just a little section in the middle of platelets and white blood cells. Okay, let's talk now about our blood vessels. The blood vessels are basically tubes that carry blood throughout our body. And we sort of split them into three categories, but really they're all interconnected. Arteries, as they get smaller and smaller, turn into veins, and then veins turn into capillaries, and as capillaries get bigger, they turn into veins. But they're all interconnected. But they have some different structure and different purposes. You actually have about 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels in your body. So that's obviously a huge number. Most of these are capillaries. They're very, very tiny. Basically, every cell in your body is surrounded by what we call a capillary network. A network of very, very small blood vessels that can provide our body tissue with oxygen and nutrients. So let's start off with arteries. Remember what I told you yesterday? Which direction arteries carry blood? The A in artery, remember, stands for away. The arteries are responsible for carrying blood away from the heart. Any blood vessel that leads away from the heart is called an artery. Most arteries carry oxygenated blood. All the parts of the body. But there's one exception. Anybody know which artery carries deoxygenated blood? Sydney?
It's the artery that brings the blood to the lungs.
It is, and it has a name. Yeah, the pulmonary artery, very good. The pulmonary artery is the only one that carries deoxygenated blood. Because that blood in the pulmonary artery is still going away from the heart, but it's deoxygenated because it has not reached the lungs yet.
Okay, I cannot spell it.
It's just oxygen
I know.
aided.
Just don't know why. Except.
And arteries, they have to withstand the pressure of our heart pumping blood into them, which creates a pretty high pressure. So that's been pretty strong. They're fairly thick walled, they're muscular, and they're smooth on the inside. Okay? And that's to allow them to withstand that pressure of the heart pumping blood into them every second. Now they start off very wide. You know, the aorta is a big, wide, thick blood vessel. But as they start to move through, smaller and smaller and smaller. So they basically just look like a smooth tube. It's fairly thick and muscular. You know, if you feel your pulse, you feel your pulse in your neck, sort of in the indentation in the left side of your neck, or in your wrist, what you're really touching is what? It's not your heart, obviously.
Artery.
It's an artery. Because each time your heart pumps blood into your arteries, they expand. They're elastic, so they expand a little bit because of that pressure, and you can feel it when your heart beats.
Is that your pulses?
What's that?
Is that what?
That's what your pulse is. Yep. It's feeling an artery that's fairly close to your skin that expands to your heartbeat. All right, so these arteries, the major arteries, go up your head and down your arms, through your torso, down each leg. But then they branch off. Okay, and they start to get smaller and smaller. As they get to individual cells, they're very, very small. They turn into what we call capillaries. Capillaries are extremely thin blood vessels. They're only one cell thick. And the capillaries allow things to move into and out of our blood. They're so tiny that the red blood cells need to line up and go through single file. That's how narrow they are. So if you look sort of at a picture or diagram, you see this very thin wall. See the red blood cells going through one at a time. But as they, so this is an artery and eventually turns into a capillary. As they move through the capillary though, this is where the exchange of material happens. This is where oxygen from the red blood cells can go to our body cells, to our tissue, and where nutrients can go through. It's also where things go into the blood, like waste and carbon dioxide. And then after they make their way through the capillary, and they've had this exchange of materials, where does this blood go after that? Back to the heart. So now, after the capillary, we call it a vein. Before the capillary, it's an artery. But they're really all one tube that's all connected. that leads us to the last type, veins. So veins carry blood which direction? To the heart. They bring blood to the heart. So they bring blood to the heart. Most veins carry what type of blood? Well, all vessels carry red blood cells. Mostly they carry deoxygenated blood, except for one vein. Which vein is it? No. No. That's an artery. What? Yes, the pulmonary vein exception. It carries blood to the heart, but that blood is rich in oxygen because it's coming from where? The lungs. They mostly carry deoxygenated blood except for the pulmonary vein. And veins are not as strong, they're not as thick and muscular and as elastic as arteries. Because by the time blood gets through the capillary to the vein, the pressure is much less. So they don't need to withstand that high pressure from the heart. In fact, they're much thinner than arteries, and inside of them, they're not smooth inside. They have valves. Little one-way doors that allow blood to only go in one direction, a single direction.
I see what you did there with the valves.
Yeah, so you can remember veins have valves. And arteries don't have these valves because they don't need them. Arteries, there's high pressure moving the blood always forward, so they don't need to have valves. But because the pressure is less in the veins, if it weren't for these valves, some of that blood may go in the wrong direction. So the valves keep it going just one way. So those are the three types of blood vessels: arteries, capillaries, and veins. Okay, you should know a little bit about each of them. And if you look sort of at a diagram of a human circulatory system and look at major arteries and veins, these are arteries, these are veins. They look pretty similar?
Yeah.
Yeah, which makes sense because these arteries carry blood down to the tips of the fingers. And that blood needs to get back to the heart somehow, so it does that through these veins. So everywhere the arteries go, sort of the veins return that blood back to the heart. Again, another diagram shows major arteries. Again, you have thick major arteries that go sort of down each arm, down the legs, into the head, and then they branch off, becoming smaller and smaller until they reach capillaries. And here you see a diagram of the heart. It's kind of hard to see these arteries. But I want you to look at, see the aorta? Remember, it loops around, and then it goes back behind the heart, down to the lower body. Okay? So these are all the major arteries. And then if we put it all together, we have arteries that were leading away from the heart. That turns into a capillary network, and then that blood returns to the heart through veins. So the last slide that we're going to do today is look at this capillary network. This is a diagram you definitely need to know for your quiz on Friday. You know all these things that are moving around here. So let's look at this. And it's not really as complicated probably as it looks. If you understand how the circulatory system works, it should be pretty clear. So what kind of blood vessel? So blood is going in this direction, from left to right on this slide. So what type of blood vessel do we have?
Artery?
That's an artery. It's going away from the heart. This whole part is called a capillary network. And then how about number two? After it goes, this blood goes through the capillary network. Here?
Vein?
Yeah, then it's a vein. And it's headed back to the heart. So what do you think these 5 things in there would be? Capillary network surrounds all of our body cells, right? Those are, maybe these are cells in our liver, or our skin, or our brain. Could be anywhere. But all of our cells are surrounded by this network of capillaries. About number 4. What do you think those little circles are?
Cells.
Yes, what type of blood cell? Those are red blood cells.
What's the purple?
Yeah, and again, remember, we indicate them losing oxygen by changing them from red to blue, but they're still red blood cells.
Oh, okay. I understand.
So all of these little circles are all red blood cells.
So number 7 is red blood cells?
Nope. So number 5. So what about, so these are the cells, but what is all, is that just air surrounding those cells? No. Cytoplasm is in cells.
Oh, yeah.
We went over this. It really is plasma, but when it moves out of the blood, we call it something else. We actually have a whole body system named after this fluid.
Endocrine?
No.
Lymph.
Lymphatic. This fluid is called what? Lymph. The fluid. All right, now some of these numbers, you have to pay close attention to the arrow, the direction, and exactly what it's pointing to. So if you look at number 6, is an arrow. It's pointing from a red blood cell going into a body cell. Raise your hand if you can tell me what substance do you think that would be? Oxygen. Oxygen goes from our red blood cells into our body cells. That is oxygen, O2.
How does it just pass through
Through what process that we know well because we studied it?
diffusion?
Yes, there's a higher concentration of oxygen in the blood cell, a lower concentration in the body cell, so oxygen diffuses into the cell.
Through the permeable membrane
Is there is that section down the middle?
of the arteries.
Yes? Yeah.
What's it called?
That's just part of the capillary.
Why is that?
Just so this cell can be close to it. So basically, it would be much more complicated, it'd be like a network, but this is just simplified a little bit, because each cell needs to be near capillary. How about 7? Now this is pointing to the space. It's nothing moving, but what is between these blood cells? Not here, seeing a lot of hands from this side of the room over here.
Sean is on fire today.
Side of Samantha, it's the only one.
Sean is on fire today.
What is that space? All right. John?
Capillary?
Well, the whole thing is a capillary, but this is a part of the blood I'm looking for. Rachel? That's plasma. Okay, 2 more. This arrow is showing something moving from the plasma into a body cell. What would that be? What moves from plasma into our cells?
Wait.
Matthew?
I got oxygen.
No, that would.
CO2?
No.
So that gets out of the body. That's what this blood?
No.
Oxygen.
Oxygen goes from red blood cells into our cells. What goes from the plasma into our cells?
Plasma?
Nutrients.
Oh my God.
Glucose, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, all sorts of things are dissolved in the plasma and they diffuse into our body cells. And last,
From the blood.
what goes from a body cell into
A white blood
the
cell.
plasma? Kevin?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide and other
Waste.
waste. CO2 you can write. So again, if you understand what the purpose of the circulatory system is, this shouldn't be a difficult diagram.
Yeah, I don't know if I should be taking this quiz tomorrow.
This is everything we covered up till today. is included on tomorrow's quiz.
I'll have lots of studies.